Chapter 45. JV stayed quiet, even after they'd gotten in the truck and headed for the ranch. Steve drove faster than normal, and she hoped there weren't any cops between them and the ranch. When he turned off the highway before the turn-off to the houses, she still didn't say anything. She braced her feet against the floorboard and put one hand on the dash to keep from bouncing around too much as he drove as fast as he could without sliding off the road or smashing them into a tree. Jess said they were checking on the horses and Frank collapsed, Steve said, finally speaking. He said he was breathing, but he couldn't wake him. He related what he knew. I'd like if you'd take a look at him. He glanced at her before turning back to the road. Sure. She winced as the truck hit a deep hole and she bounced off the seat and barely missed hitting her head on the roof. What if I can't do anything? She asked, suddenly nervous. Then I'll push energy at him and hope he heals on his own, but he's given me strict orders. No doctors. He didn't look or sound happy at the thought. I'll do everything I can, she said, wishing she could touch him in some way, but the truck was moving so violently she needed both hands to hold on. The truck skidded to a stop in front of the barn, and they got out on different sides of the vehicle. JV wasn't willing to wait for Steve to get out first. Together they rushed inside. Jess. Steve called once they were inside. Back here, the other man called. JV ran in the direction of the voice, and found the older man stretched out on an old blanket covering the fresh hay in a stall. She saw Jess to one side, but her focus was Frank. She fell to her knees beside him, laid her hand on his cheek and closed her eyes. Steve growled low and deep. Knock it off, she said without opening her eyes. You're distracting me. He fell silent and she concentrated, trying to find the cause of his blackout. She searched his system for several long moments before she found the small blood clot. She focused her energy and pushed it into him. First to break up the already disintegrating blockage, then to repair the damage it had caused. She didn't know how long she worked, but she knew it had been a while when she felt her energy flag. She dropped to her butt and slumped, but kept her hand pressed to his face, pouring everything she had into him. She was vaguely aware of movement at her back, then she felt a surge of energy. She no longer struggled to find the strength to keep going. She used the extra energy to finish repairing what she could, then she pulled back. Returning to herself, she became aware of Steve crouched behind her. His upper body supporting her. There. She sighed. It was a stroke. I've done everything I can. We need to try to wake him up. Just do that. Steve's tone was rough. She tilted her head back to see what was wrong, but he picked her up instead and carried her out of the stall. Setting her on a bench in the wide aisle, he bent down in front of her and looked into her face, his eyes filled with concern. Are you all right? He asked. She looked at him a moment before answering. I'm tired but fine. You'd be a lot more than tired if I hadn't given you energy to work. He paused and pulled her into his arms and held her tight. You would have given him everything you had. She didn't argue. She couldn't without lying. You can't do that, baby. You scared me. I'm sorry I scared you, but what? Can we go see if it worked? It better have worked, he growled as he loosened his hold on her and let her stand. She went back to the stall and found Jess, a 20-something blonde shifter who worked as a ranch hand, helping Frank to sit up. The old man looked up at her and blinked several times. I hear I have you to thank that I'm not a vegetable girl. I don't know that you would have been a vegetable, she started. He grunted and tried to push himself to his feet. She tried to go to his side but Steve stopped her with a hand on her arm. She gave him an unhappy look then turned back to Frank. Not so quick, Frank. Rest for a few minutes. I spent the last, she stopped and looked at Steve. Hour and a half. Her eyes widened in surprise and she turned back to Frank. I just spent the last hour and a half putting you back together. Take a few minutes and let your body finish what I started. He gave her a disgruntled look, but stopped trying to get up. At least you didn't haul me to the hospital and put me in one of those damned beds. You told me no doctors, Steve said. I told you I'd do my best to comply. I didn't let Jess call anyone or take you to the hospital. I just brought you one of our healers. That wasn't against your orders. You've got me there, son. He looked around, unhappy at looking up at everyone. Can I get up yet? Go ahead, but take it easy for a couple of days. Don't make me have to do that again too soon. She held out one hand and helped the old man to his feet. Once standing, he pulled her against him and gave her a quick hug. Thanks, girl. I owe you one. Steve growled. Knock it off. She didn't even bother to look at him. Frank, Steve's voice was strained. Will you please let her go, you're hurting her. The old man backed away and let go of her hand. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you. It's nothing, she tried to say, but Steve interrupted her. It's not you. It's that you're not me. His voice calmer now. She spun around and glared at him, hands on her hips. How dare you? She sent at him, stomping her foot for emphasis. She was barely aware of Jess helping Frank around them and out of the barn. I told you I'd do everything I could to protect you. If that means protecting you from yourself, so be it. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. I understood when you said I was distracting you. I backed off, but not the second time. Not when there was no need for you to go through it. He looked her in the eyes. I can sense your pain. It makes me crazy, sweetheart. She saw the pain in his eyes, the conflict that he had asked her to do something that had hurt her. She also saw the anger that she hadn't let him protect her. You can't always protect me, Steve. Sometimes I have to stand on my own 2 feet. Sometimes I have to endure the pain to do what's right. But that's not why I stopped you the second time. She looked away a minute, trying to figure exactly how to put it. It was different, yeah, touching him was uncomfortable, but it didn't burn. Not like it used to. Something flashed through his eyes, but it was gone before she could identify it. Really? He asked. You're not just telling me that so I'll back off? I don't lie to you, Steve, she said it harsher than she'd intended, but she couldn't back down. It pissed her off that he thought she would lie to him, and about something like this. I may not give you every detail, but I don't lie. His face softened. I know you don't, baby. But I had to ask. I'd know if you were lying to me, and I've never sensed that from you. He tried to pull her into his arms, but she stepped back, out of his grasp. She narrowed her eyes at him. Is it just me, or can you tell with everyone? He blinked and stepped back, giving her the space she wanted as he looked at her a moment. Everyone. She relaxed a little, not sure if the relief that washed through her was a good thing or not. The idea that it was something he could do with just her had scared her, but at the same time thrilled her. In theory, she looked forward to the deeper connection she could have with a mate once the relationship was sealed, but as she was faced with the reality, it was terrifying. She took a deep breath. All right. She didn't really know what else to say. She knew she couldn't tell him that the idea of his ability being focused just on her scared the shit out of her. She was afraid he would take it the wrong way. She had no doubts about him, but her own issues were jumping to the forefront again. She stood for a few seconds, doing nothing more than breathing and trying to calm her speeding heart. After several moments, she looked at him again. Are we done here? He looked around and shrugged. No reason to stay. Let's get out of here. A chill ran through her as she headed for the door. He fell into step beside her, slinging one arm around her shoulders. He pulled her against him. Come here. You've worn yourself out and now you're chilled.